So we're here to look and learn about the artwork that we've got on display. We looked at it the other day. And please join me in welcoming the artist. This is Cavan Fleming. I guess I met you a couple of years ago. Cavan and I were in an art exhibition. I can never remember whether it was the one in North Carolina or in
Asheville, yeah.
Yeah, Asheville, North Carolina. And then more recently, we were also in the show at the Cavan Museum of Art last year.
Yeah.
And that's how we kind of reconnected again. So I asked him if he would bring his artwork to share with us, because it's really, really remarkable. The blend, I think, of this sort of the technical aspect of the heavy use of linear perspectives, but then combined with a kind of a mystical or magical kind of quality that I think is really interesting. I'm looking forward to learning more about, and I hope that you will enjoy learning about. So I guess without much further ado, please just
all right. Thanks, Jerry.
Cavan,
all right.
And please.
Do I need to do anything?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah. So as Jerry mentioned, the last show that I was in with him was the most recent piece is the one that's right behind you, that ink drawing. But sort of the entire chronology here goes back much further than that. I think before you guys showed up, I flipped the back of this painting to see what the actual date was, because I was trying to recreate it I was trying to remember it, and I remembered wrong. So this is 2010. So that would be sort of the earliest artwork on the wall here, and it goes all the way up to, I think last year, I think is the date on that one. So it's kind of when I think about it, it's a pretty long time span. The earliest ones are the paintings. So I used to do oil painting, and then at some point there was a transition to drawing. In the past, drawing had always been just sort of a tool that I would do. So I'd have this, and I would work out ideas for a painting using a sketch pad, either in ink or graphite. But at some point, the transition happened kind of around the time of my daughter was born. I used to have a room dedicated to my practice. And so I had, paintings, a big painting like that in the corner over there I could work on, just lean it up against the wall. I could have multiple things leaning up against the wall and sort of bounce around. But I was eventually, so I got kicked out of that room once my daughter got older. So we had to, I started to turn to drawing because it was a little bit simpler. You could just have something quick in front of you. You could take it away, stash it away. Oil painting is messier. Once you get stuff laid out, you tend to just leave it laid out. So I think the first batch of drawings that I sort of successfully did is these sort of wasp-themed drawings. And so this is me really literally grabbing the remains of wasps, paper wasps or mud dauber wasps. I live out in the woods. And then sort of trying to look at the nest, look at wasps, look at their honeycombs, and then sort of recreate, just sort of my imagination, recreate, using that as my sort of visual material to recreate these, what I think of as landscapes. And so something like this, I could literally work at the kitchen table, like I did this one at the kitchen table. And I would wake up in the morning and work on it and then stash it away. And so that was sort of that transition, how I turned to drawing. And I'm still drawing. But I also now am incorporating, I'm sort of fusing painting and drawing. So for example, this one right here, Hive, is a graphite drawing done on a painting ground. So it's paper, but it's prepared as if it were to receive oil paint. So that means it has a ground on it. And then I built up in places the surface using oil paint. So it's a mixture of materials. It's kind of like a drawing done on a painting support. And so it's sort of the two things are fusing. I have a drawing that I'm working on now that it is a graphite on a board. So I have this board. Again, I prepared it as if it were going to receive oil paint. And I'm just sort of like really just sort of building up these gray tones with an extremely hard graphite pencil. And then the most recent drawing too is sort of different in that it involves collage aspects. So it's hard to see with this one, but there are pieces of paper. So this paper, there's additional pieces of paper that are inked and then collaged on top of that. So I think of it as a collage. And then, so in my mind, that's sort of like the direction I want to go into as well is doing paper and then adding paper layers on top of it, scraping away, and then sort of building up, scraping away, just like that. So it's a very iterative process, right? Incidentally, the wasp, this sort of series of 3 drawings based on wasps, I saw a paper wasp nest up in the woods, and it's like a piñata. The thing is hanging up there like 30 feet in the air from a tree, but it's massive. I mean, it's like a couple feet across, and so I have my eyes on it. And so when it drops, hopefully I could get it in time. And then so I was thinking of just sort of like dismembering this paper wasp nest, and then using that as sort of collage material too.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know, that would be sort of.
I wanted to ask you about that because first of all, I wanted to be clear that everybody understands, what he's talking about. These wasp nests are sort of football shaped that hang in trees,
Yeah.
and they're, y'all familiar with those? I mean, Southwest Virginia, surely you've seen these things. But I don't know that everybody recognizes that these drawings are actually drawings of that, of those paper wasp nests. If you look at them, they are these layered, very thin, gray shells. Like they're kind of like nested shells, aren't they? But I wanted to ask you whether you, like you said, you worked on that in the kitchen table. Did you have that actual object sitting in front of you?
Well, I would say pieces and parts. So I had scraps of the paper wasp nest, and then I had the little honeycomb piece in the center. And that's always kind of interesting to me because it's this huge structure that they build, right? But it just boils down to this tiny little honeycomb structure in the center of it.
Is it only a small piece of it or a small section that's honeycomb?
Yeah, as far as I could tell when I sort of like look inside these things. But this one, this is sort of I think of it as a landscape, and it's a recreated landscape using elements of the wasp as the sort of visual material, right? So you can, so it itself is not a single object, but this would be a honeycomb. This would be a miniature paper wasp nest. This would be the sort of like fragments of the paper wasps, like if you were to peel paper off. So it's sort of a mental collage of.
Sort of like a little doorway entrance. Almost.
Yeah. The big nest will have that sort of little thing. So that would be that. And this one sort of evolved, right, too. Eventually, it's going to sound strange, but eventually I did flip it over.
Yeah.
So it started off.
Oh, right. The sky.
Yeah, it started off in the opposite direction, and this is how it began. But then I flipped it, and then I drew these, and then so I kind of like that because if you're a wasp, then who knows what their visual perspective is, right? Yeah. So I sort of in the end I sort of like that.
Well, and this one. You said that they're like landscapes, but that one almost feels like you're inside it. Like
Yeah,
cave.
yeah. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah,
and
it comes across.
Oh, okay. Because I always feel like maybe I wasn't as effective at that, but so that would be the entrance.
Sure.
And I always was trying to get that to be the lightest light. I mean, that's a hard thing with drawing or painting is like choosing what your lightest light is going to be and what your darkest dark is going to be, and then having the entire range of tones in between.
Right? I should have had you come in the morning and talk to my drawing class and my painting class because we were talking about that stuff in my drawing class.
Yeah.
Avery is in both, so she's heard me rant about protecting your white space and you got to guard it. It's not enough just to ignore it. You can't just ignore it.
Yeah, you don't want to spill tea on it or anything like that.
Right.
But and that took me That is that's a hard lesson to learn. Someone can tell you it, but I feel like for me it took just a lot of hours of just like working it to get it so where I can visually tell what my range of tones is in between my darkest dark and my lightest light. And that's like pretty key, I think, probably for painting too, right? It's like kind of want to get your lightest light and your darkest dark, or your most saturated color figured out, and then your darkest, and then you don't want those to be competed with in any sort of way, and your entire mid-tone in between. So, but that was something that I struggled with that, is because I felt like the lightest light really wasn't quite light enough for me, and I was scraping at it, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna like paint it or something like that. So, but you know, that's just me being obsessive, I guess.
Yeah. So, well, go ahead.
Oh, and the other wasp drawing over there, it sort of had an interesting, so that was also me sitting at the table. And that was sort of started with me just looking at the entire nest, but then just sort of disintegrating it. So that would be one of those things where I started the drawing and you probably heard this too. It's like you don't just like draw a line contouring your object, right? You know, I'm telling my daughter this, like she's drawing an eye, and I'm telling her like an eye is not an almond, a heavy lined almond tilted on its side, right? You know, it's like it has a lot of variation of tone, line, heaviness of a line, all this stuff. You don't just do like an oval, right? Well, you can, but you know,
it echoes of my drawing class.
Yeah.
Very, very strong. It's good.
But that sort of started that way too. Like, you know, sometimes when I'm doing these drawings, I'm breaking old habits, right? So like, like that one I just drew the wasp nest. I'm like, I'm just drawing the contour of this wasp nest. And in the end, it was sort of dissatisfying, so I started disintegrating it. And then eventually, I felt like it reduced down just to that little honeycomb piece in the center of it. And so that to me was kind of visually interesting. So I kept that.
And is this, you talked about using it as a collage element. Is it actually, how durable is that stuff?
I don't know. I think it's going to be just experimental. You mean like the nest aspect, the paper nest. I think I'm just going to sort of play around with it and just sort of not really invest too much into anything. Just sort of see how it works.
Yeah, by different glues.
Yeah. Just the standard, I guess, like archival bookbinders glue, which is what I sort of used with that.
Well, which, by the way, I have to say that, you know, I think it's great, you know, in your mind, this, you know, it is a collage, and I'm not disputing that, but it's probably one of the most minimal collages I've seen, because the amount of collage.
There's secret collage
it's
in
like
there, though.
Secret collage.
There is secret collage.
Yeah, it's very minimum amount, but I like that. I mean, I think it makes it very interesting, because I really like drawings that the viewer discovers things as the longer they look, and that's a big part of, you know, my practice too. Like, so you discover things, and so that, you know, the collage aspect would be a discovery as you look at it.
Yeah. Well, maybe the most interesting collage piece in that is the figure. So I don't know if that's clear. If you were to look at it, if that was clear to your eye, or if you had to get up close to know that it was collage. But that would be the most interesting collage piece. That figure is a collage.
Because these two pieces break the fit.
Yeah. And I thought, I think maybe I did that to sort of reveal that this is happening inside of the plane picture square also, but it's hard to see.
Gotcha.
So, and I'm trying to think what else to say about that one. So that one, you know, so like the ink can come off, it's fairly flat. So a lot of this is built up micron pen. So you imagine one of those, I don't know if anyone draws with those micron pens, but they, you know, they're fine lines, so I'm building up. But I think eventually I broke down, I consider it cheating, but eventually I broke down and used ink wash. So that might sound kind of silly to people, but like I felt like I was cheating because it happened toward the end. And I thought, I really just need to like build up some darks here.
Yeah, if you look at it closely, you'll see that a lot of these gray tones are built up of incredibly thin lines. Like you must be using a 00.
The finest micron.
Yeah, and that's a really thin line.
Yeah, those tend to clog pretty easy. I mean, they're frustrating to use now. I'm sort of maybe part of the transition to graphite, at least there in the most recent one, is that the frustration with those micron pens. You know, they do tend to clog. But even with the graphite, I'm using a lot of times I'm using a 9H pencil. So I'm just sort of sitting here, and my daughter, like I'm sitting here doing this, and she comes over and goes, you know, you're not doing anything, right? You know, because it's just like it's kind of almost polishing the surface.
A 9H pencil is a weapon. It's not really a drawing
it's great.
tool.
Yeah, it's great too. It will.
So sharp.
Yeah, it will create a lot. Sometimes it'll create a jagged line too. So it's a mixture of marks. Like one of them is just like you're creating a gray tone that's very faint, and you're almost polishing the surface. But sometimes you're scraping the surface too, because you'll have this jagged edge that just sort of. So it's a combination of things.
Well, what about maybe just briefly? How did you come to art? I mean, what was your path to art making?
Well, so I'm not. So I have a pretty unconventional career, I guess. I don't even say I have a career. I mean, I have work at Virginia Tech. I have a research project. I have a science background, but I don't have full employment. So some of these were done when I was, underemployed. So I was just doing it. But I felt like this is something that I've always done, right? So it's hard for me to point at any stage in my life where I was not doing it, or there was any sort of like great moment where I decided to do this. I felt like I was always doing it.
Art has always been something you're doing alongside, but what is your education career in science?
Yeah.
So you do your degrees
in chemistry. Yeah, I mean, I did. Yeah, I have a PhD in chemistry. I did postdoctoral research in chemistry. I worked for a period of time, I worked in Washington, D.C. on radar systems. And now I'm working in the Department of Neuroscience at Virginia Tech. Mostly I'm doing sort of data analysis.
Data analysis, chemistry, radar.
It's weird.
Neuroscience.
Yeah. No, it's weird.
That's a lot. I mean,
it's weird.
I think it's really fascinating because what I'd like you to just talk about, maybe just real briefly, just how do you see those the world of those kind of technical science-oriented things that you might call STEM. People like to call STEM sciences relating to art, because I think, in fact, this is something I'm not a fan of, is there's a lot of separation between those two things, and there's a lot of effort to like really isolate STEM fields from the humanities fields, and I personally think it's a mistake. And then in you are combining those two. How does that work for you?
I think so. I mean, you could probably tell that there's sort of a real attention to detail, right? So that's the most obvious answer, right? Oh, yeah, that's on fire, please. The most obvious. So I think probably the most obvious answer is just sort of an attention to detail, right? So if you were doing some sort of technical field, you would also have like sort of this ability to hyperfocus or have attention to detail. So that's sort of like the clear answer, but I think in the more murky sense, it's all sort of like process based, So over the years, decades or whatever that I've been doing this, like I pretty much have a process, right, that I've worked out over time. And so when I sit down, if I have an hour in the morning and I sit down, by the way, my time window to do this type of thing has really shrunk in the past year or two. So I don't really have a painting or an art practice right now, I would say, because, well, it just shrunk down to like a weekend or something like that. If I could get up early on the weekend and do an hour or two, that's a successful week. That's not, for me, sustainable in the long run. I need to figure out how to carve out more and more time during the week to do this, because this is what I do, right? but I have a process. So if I have an hour or two in the morning, I don't sit there and have like, you know, writer's block or the, you know, the artist's equivalent of writer's block. I just engage the process. So it's sort of, process is maybe not the right word because it sounds too mechanical, but it's just a trust and intuition, or like, and I just, my mind sort of slips into that space and I just sort of do the thing that I do, right? So it's like a process. And I think science is also very process oriented too.
Sure.
So.
And on a sort of more broader conceptual thing, one of the things that I think about that unites those things is exploration and experimentation. Because I think art is very experimental, and there's a lot of discovery that happens.
Yeah.
So I think so to me, the thought process is, they may be accessing different sets of data in your brain, but the process seems to be very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's sort of talk of that break, you know, the hemispheres breaking down the left brain and the right brain. And I'm not, I feel like maybe I'm just sort of a hybrid brain person. But I would also say I'm not really successful as a scientist. You know, I have no career in it, but I do it. But I'm sort of able to fuse. I'm guessing I'm sort of a left brain, right brain person. But yeah, that to me is, so like I feel like there's different discoveries that I'm making, sort of materials wise, as I'm moving through this. You know, for example, like this figure is linseed oil, right? So this is linseed oil mixed with marble dust, calcium carbonate, and made into a putty that I put down.
Yeah, notice it's very textural, right?
Yeah, because it kind of like dried and wrinkled and stuff, you know. Like. And then I scoured it. It wasn't a perfect shape, so I took a razor blade and scoured out. It took probably like a month for that figure pad to dry.
Really?
Yeah, because it was like a very dimensional pad. And I think that's what that shrinking texture was. Yeah. But I carved out the figure with a razor blade, right? So that was sort of a discovery. That was sort of like my discovery, you know. It's like, oh wow, okay, I could sort of do that. And so I do that in the drawing I'm working on now. I'm doing that. So I feel like discovery is very important.
Yeah.
Materials-wise, or just like visual, like the visual elements that you use to use as a springboard for whatever you're going to do, painting or drawing or whatever. That's always sort of a discovery-based thing.
What about this one?
Yeah, so I feel like these are sort of tied together. Like chronologically, they're not. Like this was 2010, and this was pretty recent, maybe a year or two ago. Like these were the two recent ones, that one and that one. But you know, so I, you know, again, it's a landscape in my mind, a fusion of elements. You know, sort of like you can imagine like pulling back from a suburban strip and looking down at that. But you can also imagine it being a circuit board or something like that. In fact, I had a kid's toy that was broken, and I pulled out the circuit board and was looking at it. So there is elements, visual elements of that circuit board in that. So I sort of like fuse those two pieces. Like if you pull back from a suburban landscape and we're looking at it from very far, you would see all these roads sort of nested together, and there would be some sort of system to it. The same with the circuit board. So I use those two things as visual elements, and then, you know, sort of lights and signage, but these things are not necessarily done to accuracy, right? I'm just sort of letting my imagination go and creating what I think is a sort of a new landscape, right? So it is, in my mind, a landscape, but it's not a traditional landscape. It's sort of a new landscape. And this one is sort of similar too, in that there's a lot of signage, sort of suburban structure, I guess, all sort of mashed together. So in my mind, these two are connected, even though maybe they don't seem like it.
No, spatially they are, for sure. You know, in terms of the space that they're describing.
Yeah.
They're definitely a kind of a panoramic vista, as opposed to an interior. And then, you know, the use of perspective is really, really striking and really accurate, or feels that way at least. So where did you pick that?
Well, I would say that's based on a photograph. So this is a photograph that I took.
Okay.
And then I really just sort of, and that is too, these are Roanoke landmarks.
Oh, yeah? Was that
You might-
shops or something? It looks like the...
So the factories that are, so there's this warehouse on Walnut Street Bridge. I don't know if it's closed or not, but I've been poking around. Yeah, I've been poking around in there. And then also the rayon plant that's at the River Bend, you know, the old industrial park.
Yep.
That's a scene from the rayon plant. So this is me. Yeah, this is me poking around. So I'm taking photographs. The building is also based on photographs. This is me approaching a construction project and taking photographs of it at different stages of its development, and then using that as the material for those two right there. And I've got a third that's sort of in process, but just leaning against the wall that's also using that.
But the large painting is much older than, so you're returning to the theme.
Yeah, I sort of like I have several sort of things that are either half-baked or started that are based on that, and that I may return to, you know. So yeah, I'm using so if it's like that, you know, so for example, that building or that the girders I'm leveraging one of my photographs. So I'm really sort of looking at trying to adjust the perspective, adjust the lines, and get it as close as I can, you know. But it's one of those things where it's probably sort of a fake out, you know. Like if you were to see it, you would kind of go, oh, that doesn't look like it, you know. But I'm using it to try to help myself gain that, like nail the perspective as best as I could. So no projection, nothing like no projection. But I do have a scaled photograph that I'm looking at. I'm using a ruler. I'm using, you know, making marks and a little bit over here, a little bit over here, and doing all these little adjustments.
Yeah. You can. I was wondering how you did it, because I used a lot of perspective years and years and years ago. And one of the things that I did that people do is, you know, they'll put a thumbtack in the wall with a string on it. And that looks a little bit like the way that could be done.
Yeah.
That's the way I did mine when I was doing it. Did you use anything?
Yeah. I had it on the floor, and I had a long wood strip, and I had it tethered down, and then I used this long wood strip and I rotated it through an arc. And to get the yep, that's how I did that. Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot about that. When you mentioned that, yeah.
No, I was just curious because it was something that I had done.
Yeah. So with something like that, right. So something like that, I have a photograph, but in the end, I'm using this wood strip and rotating it through an arc and doing a bunch of lines as I rotate it through this arc to get my windows. And then, you know, and it may in the end not really look like the photograph, but I'm using it as a tool. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Well, we had some questions from students. We came up here the other day, and I asked students to come up with some questions. So, can I ask Brianna, would you start?
Yeah, one question I had was like a series of other uses, like you said, like buildings, like industrial looking to me.
Yeah.
What attracts you about those type of buildings?
Well, so some of this is autobiographical, right? As I mentioned to Jerry. So this is me exploring these spaces, like literally on foot, trespassing. But yeah, me exploring, taking photographs. So there, it's certainly autobiographical, and there's also figures in some of these too, and I think of those as autobiographical too, right? But I think that's sort of one of the reoccurring themes. Like this might seem very scattered visually, but for me it's about, you know, structures or systems, right? So I feel like maybe that's the one thing that I turn back to all the time is structures or systems. And so these are obvious structures, right? I feel like there's sort of a system to this one too, like a visual system that goes beyond just the obvious structure, the building structure to it. So for me, that drawing and the wasp drawing are like essentially the same. Like just, you know, how I would approach it and how I think of it as like a structure of some sort, a structure or a system of some sort. So I feel like that, that's the best answer I could give, you know. So that would be sort of a building or interior structure would be very, in my mind, very similar to, you know, a landscape that you pull away from or a wasp nest that you do a microscope on and like bore into. Sort of, that's kind of how I think about it.
Avery?
For the pieces that are kind of like almost a little distressing, like there's like a single person in a big field of like just barren landscape and the guy who's like crouched over in the chair with his head, his face in his hands, and like all like the industrial stuff and like the people just alone. What's the inspiration behind some of these more, like, I guess these, again, distressing looking pieces?
Well, that's interesting. So I'm hoping they're interesting, not just simply distressing, right? You know, but that's hard for me to say because, like I mentioned before, there's sort of a level of intuition or sort of process-based work to this. So I don't necessarily start out knowing what the image is going to be. There's just maybe some visual fragments that I put together. It's very iterative, right? So things get removed, things get added. It shifts quite a bit over the lifetime of the painting. So it's kind of hard for me to talk about that because there's definitely a level of intuition where I'm just sort of engaging in the process and just I'm almost discovering what the image is going to be. You know, so like
as you go.
Yeah, as I go.
You just make up stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so like this one I knew. So for example, I had the building as material, and so in my mind, that the building is sort of like a very similar to a wasp nest. That's why I call it Hive, right? So it's like because it's kind of this repeat structure. You imagine the center of the wasp nest has that hexagon cell-like thing. So in my mind, that's kind of very similar. So I called it Hive, and I kind of liked it visually ambiguous. Like I don't know if it's clear what's happening in the sky. Like if that's a starry sky, or if in my mind that could also be a bunch of insects, maybe fireflies, just like a swarm of them in the sky. So I kind of wanted that to be a little bit ambiguous. But yeah, so there's definitely a level of intuition and discovering what the image is going to be. Because I would say with a lot of these, I didn't know that it was going to turn out the way it turned out. I would say like for every one of these, I didn't know it was going to turn out the way it was going to turn out. But I had a starting point. So.
Jacob, do you have something? Do you have a question? No?
He already answered.
Oh, okay. What?
He already answered my question. It was similar to the question.
Similar question?
Yeah.
Emily?
Do you sell your paintings
Oh,
in your drawings?
I have. I don't with any regularity, but I have in the past. Yeah.
you said you were into science.
Yeah.
How do you combine that and painting because they are not?
They seem unrelated, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a concise answer for that or a clear answer, but I was mentioning to Jerry how they're both very process-based, right? So there's both the attention to detail and also process-based work. So I feel like that's probably like the best explanation as to how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that the relationship to science and art is, a lot of it is, well, what would happen if I did this? And what would happen then if I did that? And then if I do that, how do I then resolve that? And what would it take then to resolve that I've stirred up? I mean, like the blob of marble dust and oil that you put on there that is like, oh man, well actually that's going to take a while to dry, and then working with that, or just the exploration. One of the things that's, you can think about science as being exploration in combining chemicals and seeing what are the properties then of that. You maybe come up with a substance that you need to then explore and maybe analyze, break down, and figure out what's happening. And I mean, in terms of a thought process, I think about this, with the girders, and you have the structure that you start with, but then there's a whole lot of exploration, like, okay, if I make this structure, what am I going to find in there? I mean, that's partly what I think about when I draw as well. It's like, well, if I extend a line over here, what am I going to encounter? And it seems funny to say, but you don't know what you're going to find. And then, you make some more marks and you say, oh, I see, it's going to be, some kind of ladder structure, or it's going to be a person, or there's going to be, and you don't really know what's going to be in that building when you start it, maybe. You just kind of find the things as you go through.
Yeah, and some of the difficulty too is deciding how much is enough. And obviously I don't know, right? Because I'm sitting there like, I'm just going to keep on making marks. But yeah, it's like you have this space. So why do you have to fill the space, right? It's like, so if I just did this and I just if I just put in the girders and then had void space, why is that not done, right? I don't know, but like,
for somebody it would be.
Yeah, for somebody it would be, but my personality says I must fill the space, and so that's all. But that's always difficult. That's always, I think, a difficult decision, right? It's sort of like you have all this real estate on this thing. If you're doing 2D stuff, you have all this real estate. It's like, how am I going to fill up the real estate?
Exactly. I think that's one of the things that makes art, it's like a science of the interior, like a science of your own, because what you're finding is you're finding what's in your own mind. You're exploring, it's a way to explore your own mind. And like you just were saying, someone would do the girders and discover that there was nothing there. I don't mean to say that they're empty-headed, but I mean, for them, it's like empty spaces. That's what they discover, empty space. And you discover different things when you start, sort of exploring. Because exploring that blank page becomes an exploration, ultimately, of just what is in your own brain.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an internal journey, kind of like. But it's scientific in that it's process-based and it's explorative, experimental. A lot of times people talk about art being like alchemical, like an alchemist is.
You're transforming.
Materials.
You're taking a couple ingredients and then transforming it into an image, which hopefully is interesting to look at.
If you're really lucky, it'll turn into gold.
Yeah, right.
But you're taking, like graphite, it's just like kind of like a dirt, and you're using the dirt in a way, and you're smearing it around. That's what I think about with charcoal drawing a lot. It's like it's really just burnt wood, but if you mush the burnt wood around just right, it can be something beautiful, which is transformative, and that's the alchemy.
Yeah, or like that vine charcoal, that stuff
Special.
that stuff is weird because it just sort of turns into dust. You just go.
Oh yeah, right.
And it just breaks apart, and it's so it itself is so fragile. Yeah, it's like.
So anybody else? Questions, thoughts, things that you were wondering about? Anybody? I mentioned before that I find it really interesting that there's this kind of blend of mechanical and mystical. And I think that's a really interesting quality that kind of reminds me a little bit of, in literature, what people call magical realism. You know, familiar with magical realism? Yeah. Especially among South American writers. Because it has that a little bit of like the reality of the reality of the structure is so strong and clearly defined. And then the exploration reveals ethereal type stuff that is very unexpected. And maybe clearly, really, with one called Hive, where you have this, it looks, you know, almost like a structure on the moon or something, you know, really.
Yeah.
In outer space, but then very, very rectilinear and structurally rigid, unexpected combination.
Yeah, so someone, like, so people sometimes say it's post-apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
Not just that, but like other things. And that, so like I sort of bristle with that. Bristle
that's
to,
not how you
no. Yeah, it's not, yeah. I mean, often these are disused industrial spaces, right? But yeah, I don't, so I always sort of, I don't have a good answer to that, but I really sort of bristle when I hear that. Like, oh man, they didn't get it, you know, but.
Well, yeah. But if you go to, is it the viscose plant? Is that the
I've
been around, I've been through a lot of that area. I have some friends who have studio spaces over there.
Yeah.
It does feel
Post-apocalyptic?
Like, yeah. I think it feels very much like some kind of strange medieval village or something over there, because it's vast. This is a vast place.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by it.
There's streets and alleyways networking all these buildings, and then, the underground, they're all connected by this underground ventilation system.
Oh, you shouldn't tell me that, because I'm going to have to go try to find it.
Yeah, it's a very, very strange place. But the funny thing about that is that it's not post-apocalyptic, it's actually now, it's actually real.
Yeah,
And I think about, when I look at this drawing, it reminds me of driving through West Virginia, and you will come around, you'll be driving through these steep mountain gorges, and it's lined with trees, it's very rural, and you come around a bend, and there is this glowing oil refinery, or gas refinery, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, or a interstate stopover, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of that signage, some of the signage here is sort of the Loves, the Loves.
Oh yeah. Truck stops.
Yeah, truck stops. Yeah, so some of the signage there, and there's a Dairy Queen sign.
Yeah.
Some of that signage is just sort of, just that coming, going.
So it's not a dire prediction of the future, it's a reporting of the present.
I think so, with the extrapolations, yeah. Sort of coming, descending down, driving in Southwest Virginia, descending down into this, holler, right? And then it's like there's all these signs and glowing things.
It's a bright light and it just glows,
Yeah, that's definitely was inspiration for that, but there's also other, it's not just simply that, and I can't necessarily say what it is, because it is, probably semi-abstract also,
sure.
right?
Imaginary.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's cool. Anyone else? Thoughts? Questions? Comments? Anything? All right, well, I think that was really great. I love learning about your work and really exploring, because I'll tell you that the hives over here, when you first set them up, when you first installed it, I didn't see that at first, and I came back on
That it was
secondary.
sort of an interior space?
And that's when it dawned on me
Okay.
that, I see, and the coloration and everything is
Yeah.
like, these are like paper wasp nests. These very much are.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to see that. And then so I'm glad you brought that up, because I was curious about it.
Okay.
And so that's great. Well, then, if that's it, thank you very much. I'd like everybody to join me in thanking Cavan for coming.